You are officially invited. Yes, you. You're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my 8-week program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start the second week of January. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 344. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. All right, today I have a special, we can call it an anniversary edition of the podcast. But for those of you who've been listening to the podcast for a really long time, like years, like 5 years, some of you may remember that in 2015, episode 57, my husband interviewed me. So in today's show, I was talking about, what I was going to talk about, and he was like, well, why don't I just interview you again? And so I thought it'd be a good idea. So we decided to team up for an episode, give you a really interesting little peek into our lives, but more specifically, give some practical information. So I thought it would be kind of fun to do the husband's perspective, because for everyone who listens to the show, every now and then we do talk specifically about how to handle fertility awareness, especially if you're in a relationship, if you're in a new relationship, how you would have that conversation. If you have been in a relationship for a while and now you want to switch up your birth control, some of the challenges that can arise, particularly if your partner isn't familiar with fertility awareness and doesn't really trust it. So I think that part of the episode will be really interesting, given that I teach fertility awareness, how it worked with my partner and myself. So welcome to the show, John.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
It's funny because I had to kind of dial back. Like, when did we actually do that episode together? I just looked it up. But yeah, it was actually 5 years ago.
5 years ago. Wow. That's a long time. And during that 5 years, I definitely have a different outlook in regards to your movement in regards to vaginas and stuff like that. Yeah, different. Compared to now, completely different.
Yeah, because I don't really focus on a lot of like our lives, that kind of like the back end, the behind the stage, if you will. But I think that it would be fair for anyone to have wondered, like, what's it like to be like my partner, given that this is what I do. And what I often say is that, well, you know more about the menstrual cycle more than you ever wanted to, and more about all of this really female stuff than most women at this point, really. Of course, not the women who listen to this podcast, but I think you know what I mean. So I just wanted to I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, but we can just kind of see how it goes. But the one question I want to ask you was thinking back. So we've been together for a long time, over a decade, more than that. How long have we been together?
A long, long time.
Well, so when we think back to when we first started dating, so one of the things that makes this different than some of the women who are listening when they're trying to broach this topic with their partners is that I had already been charting for a really long time by the time we had even met. So when we started our relationship, that conversation needed to be had pretty soon into the relationship. So what I always say is that I only ever had to kind of negotiate the terms of the fertility awareness and how to manage the fertile window. We only really had to negotiate it at the beginning of the relationship, and it's been
Right.
that way ever since.
Right.
Whereas for some women, they were using birth control or they were using different methods, and then they have to, transition. So dialing back all the way to when we first started dating, what was it like for you to basically have this woman who just laid it on the table, like, okay, so I'm not on birth control. I never will be. I do this charting my cycles thing. And what was that like for you?
The first thing that came to mind was she wants to trap me.
Oh, come on.
And then I was like, she's really smart. She knows her stuff. She's been sharing with me the work that she's done in the community in terms of women's cycle. And you spoke about the charting book that you created. So I was okay with it. But then I was like, what kind of granola type of birth control is this? She's just going to write in a book and all of a sudden we're good to go. I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't understand it. And then over the years, you started explaining more and more because I was curious. I was like, this thing is actually working.
Well, obviously.
I was like, I don't know what kind of magic words she puts in, because what I used to see you do is you used to just pull out a book and then you see you calculating something, you write it in a book, you close it back, and then you're like, okay. And I'm like, so that's it? That's how it works. But I never really analyzed the book or anything like that. Then years went by, and as I was hearing your conversations and you were talking about the book, and then when you were recreating some stuff, I was just like, okay, when you're talking about the window and ovulation and different types of stickiness and stuff. And when you went into the mucus stuff, I just was not interested, because anything with mucus, I think in your throat, cold, spit, yeah, no. And then I got a greater understanding as time went on, and just as you were developing the book, that's the point that really gave me the eureka moment of, wow, okay, I get it. That's really cool. Because you were 100% sure. You were just like 99%. If you follow this, you will not get pregnant. There is a window, there is certain tastes and stickiness and all this kind of stuff. And you had your science down packed.
Well, this is really interesting because as much as we've talked about it, I never really asked you what your perspective was. So that's really interesting. I think that one of the things I've talked to with my clients is there's different ways that this works as a couple. So in case you didn't catch that, in our relationship, basically, this is from my perspective, so correct me if I'm wrong, but because I teach this stuff and because I know and understand it and I'm really confident, you basically trusted me.
Absolutely.
And so it's interesting to hear you say you were like, when do we have sex, and write it down, because that's not that's actually not how, like, when I think about how that it has worked, like from a very practical sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I have always been charting. So I always know where I am in my cycle.
Yes.
And basically when we're intimate, I just tell you, like, do you want to, like, if today's the day, if you want to make babies, I usually make a joke about it.
Yes. Yes.
And then if I'm not in my window, then I'll say, like, we're good to go. And that's basically how it works. So in our relationship, from my perspective, I think it's so interesting that that's how you look at it, because basically in our relationship, because you basically trust me, so you've never really questioned me.
I had to, because I had no idea about this stuff.
But it's really interesting because you must trust me a lot, because you don't, even as much as I think you understand, and you do now for sure, but I've never pulled out a book and actually, like, sat there and explained to you cervical fluid. And this is really interesting, actually, this conversation. So yeah, I think that that's really, really interesting. So basically, and this is an interesting model because you basically trusted me. I basically tell you if today's the day that we make babies or not. And we basically go on my lead. You are not looking at my charts and interpreting them. It's you don't even pay attention. And I'm not, I'm completely fine with it. But just for everyone who's listening, who's curious. So there's no like him looking at my charts and like looking at what's going on
No,
or me explaining in a lot of detail. It's literally like me saying like green light or red light.
that's right.
Basically, that's it.
Yes.
And so he's pretty much hands off, and it makes sense if you think about it since I teach it, since I'm so deep into it, like just with regards to your personality. But at the end of the day, and my personality too, at the end of the day, like that's kind of a window into like one way that this can look for people.
For sure.
And I recognize that it certainly doesn't look this way for everybody. So then the question, and obviously we've been together for over a decade. I like, this is bad, right? That I can't just roll it off the tongue. Like 12 years? I don't know. But is that bad? But anyways, we've been together for a really long time, and it's worked. I've actually made the comment, like, because this is too much information, but I think I did do an episode a couple hundred ago or something where I said like things that I'm planning to do in preparation for pregnancy. So I'll just say, like, we've been having conversation for several years about whether or not to have baby number 3. And I've been known to say, like, there's no mistakes in our house. We both know too much. And at this point,
fair.
you know, when I'm in my fertile window as well. So even though we haven't had like detailed conversations about mucus and how it works, you know, so I couldn't even like, I wouldn't never do that, but I couldn't even like, because before I would say anything, you would already know.
Yes. Spidey senses. Spidey.
So I've been known to say like, man, I wish we could like, because it's hard. Sometimes it's hard, you know, when you want to have another baby, but it's like never the right time. And like, if you just like, if we accidentally got pregnant, then there's no accidents because we both know too much.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah.
No, we could pretend.
Yeah, but we don't.
No.
Yeah, we know too much. So anyways, I hope that this is helpful to everyone who's listening, because the one thing I'll say as well is that it doesn't have to look like this. So I certainly have had clients whose partners are very involved, who will read the book so that they understand,
Right.
and that will actually look at the chart. So the question for you then, is it just a personality thing? Like, so let me give you a scenario. I've spoken to many clients whose partners are really, really skeptical
Yes.
and don't understand the science, but also like are just not even willing to like just really, really skeptical that there could possibly be a period of your cycle where you couldn't get pregnant.
When you hear the general process of it, it just doesn't connect. Because as myself, just being, we're accustomed just to hearing either pill or condom. I never heard that method ever. I just never. No, from working in a community setting for years, working around health practitioners, working around a lot of women, I just never heard that method before. I didn't hear it. When you were the first one to mention it ever. So when I heard this, I was just like, I didn't even know that's possible.
And you have 3 sisters.
And I have 3 sisters. And I don't even think they've heard of it before either, prior to when you brought it up. And yeah, I found it really interesting. And I knew that you're just a person that likes to research the heck out of everything. So I'm like, what is the probabilities that she's wrong? You're a researcher. So from that allowed me to kind of to be more comfortable with the decision. But it was interesting to me because I was like, there is actually another method out there, and we don't have to use condoms. That's a plus because I didn't like them. So, hey.
Well, so I think that like, so for someone who is trying to like have this conversation with their partner, I mean, there's no direct insight that anyone can give in every situation, but it sounds like the things that made you more comfortable were kind of knowing me and my personality, I mean, I had made a book about it. I taught people. So I think it's a little bit different in that respect because there's no like, I don't think she knows her stuff. Like if you want, I could stand up and give you a 3-hour presentation. That's like the last thing you would ever want to do in life. Mm-hmm. What I usually suggest to my clients and to women who are thinking about, especially when you have already, I feel like it's different when you're starting a relationship and you can kind of start that relationship with these conversations, because basically from the start, then we had to figure out how we were going to manage it. Because there's obviously periods of time when I can get pregnant. And so we had to have those conversations basically right off the bat. But I think
Yes.
it's more challenging when you have already several years of interacting with each other in a certain way and then having to renegotiate the terms basically. And so it sounds like some of the things that were helpful for you is kind of like knowing like she knows what she's talking about,
Hmm.
but and just having that degree of trust. But for many of my clients, that's not enough. And maybe one of the things I suggest is the first, before you try to convince your partner, you have to take the time to really know it yourself so that when you're trying to explain it to your partner, because what you said, you've never heard of it. Most people haven't.
No.
Yeah, most men haven't necessarily. I mean, there's no 100% because certainly I've had clients who literally told me that their male partners were the ones that told them about this method.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, so there's that obviously that's an exception to the rule, but I don't know. Do you have any advice for or any suggestions for women who find themselves in that position and like their partner is like, I don't know what she's talking about. I don't think this is going to work. And what you said, is she trying to trap me? Meaning, is she trying to just get me pregnant, like get pregnant and all that kind of stuff? I mean,
Because I'm sure there's intentions like that out there too, right? Absolutely, I'm sure. But I think it's a person to person scenario, and it's all about the comfort and the openness, the conversation that two people need to have, and talk about the just in case. Also, say we're going to use this method, but if there is a probability that if the method does fail, if it didn't, if by mistakenly I judged things wrong, I wasn't when I went to sample stickiness, I never want to use mucus. If I want to sample stickiness and I thought it was a dry day, but whatever, and you just read it wrong, and you went ahead, you connected with each other, and then all of a sudden there was a child. That's a discussion that needs to be held because you want to be careful by saying, this is 100%. This is always going to work. I know what I'm doing, and just in case there is that room for error, because men are about very like concrete stuff. You said it's going to work. You said it's worked. It didn't work, and it happens. And there could be times where it's been working, and then that magical month it didn't work. Right? So it's to be mindful that the conversation you have to have with your partner is very open, very transparent. Not to say that condoms and the pill and the stuff, there's times where it doesn't work also. That happens too. Everything has its flaws. But I believe it's about the conversation and openness and where you're at in life. Because with you and I, even if there was any type of mistake in our system, we would have been okay. We'd have been like, oh, all right, cool, high five, and we would have carried on with our way because where there's a will, there's a way. But yeah,
yeah, no, that I think that's really important. And one of the things I often say is that when you're using the pill or condoms or an IUD or any of these other methods, that conversation still needs to happen. Because there are no methods that are 100%. And I think most people, I mean, I know people who have gotten pregnant using obviously I do the podcast, so I've aired a lot of interviews as well. But at this point, other than the implant, I'm pretty sure that I've heard of at least, heard of stories where people have conceived using the IUD,
yes,
using the pill,
yes,
using condoms, using withdrawal. So I think that's
absolutely
important, of course. And but then, okay, so I think you said a couple of things that are really important. You said, men like for things to be concrete. Obviously, you're skeptical of something you've never heard before, particularly if you're not, like if your partner is also just learning. If she's just learning, then it's hard to be fully confident if she's not fully aware yet. So for the men who are, so we were in a situation where like you said, like accidents don't happen in our house, but if it did, then it wouldn't be the end of the world. But for someone for whom it would be the end of the world, and it's absolutely like, no, we're not, because everyone's at different points in their life. Everyone's
absolutely
relationships are different.
yes.
So for that person whose partner is like, absolutely not, like, what, if anything, would you say to that person?
That's a good question.
Because I mean, we have like in our experience, 12 years strong, and like no, not even the slightest sliver of a mistake, because
Wow.
we're both on top of it, and that's just how it is. So it's possible that it can like work for people. This is the premise of my entire business. Like
Yes.
when you know what you're doing, when your partner's on board, and when you Take the time to learn and understand your cycle, and you're not gray with things, you're black and white, and you're very specific with how you approach your fertile window, then it is possible for this to be a highly successful method, as effective as the pill. But yeah, but I can sense your
Yeah, I feel that, well, as you're saying, for both, for the couples who are on board, cool. If there is mistakes, that's fine. For those who are not okay with that, and if there is a mistake, to be reminded that it is a method. There are methods. And with that being said, to do your diligence, to do your best to make sure that you are applying the method correctly. That's key, right? And that's key for me. That we're doing it correctly. We're doing it right. I'm like that with everything. Like, are we doing this right? Hold on, wait a second. Let me take a look. Instead of just jumping in and be like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. So to be comfortable, for both people to be comfortable, to say, okay, we're doing this method, we're doing it right. And if there is a chance, as we said, if there is something wrong, you have to come up with a contingency plan.
yeah,
Contingency, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
there needs to be a plan around the plan, because you never know. You just don't know.
yeah,
Right. And then and then with that plan, if the plan is to not move forward with whatever happens, then having a plan around the healing, because there is a part of healing that comes with that too.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I feel like that is it makes perfect sense. And I would say that, just, based on what we're talking about here, this is why I always say everyone's relationship is different. So I've had clients whose partners are very involved, whose partners read the book, whose partners will interpret the charts. I've had clients who will put their charts up, whether it's in their bedroom, in their closet. Their partners understand, the green dots, dry days, like depending on the charting system. But of course, I teach a certain charting system, right? So I've had clients whose partners are much more involved, and that, because I think one of the challenges is that, for me, I'm cool with taking responsibility for my part in it. So I'm cool with doing the charting and being the one that tells you when I'm fertile or not, and basically just like doing that and that being my thing. And I know for some women it feels a bit ominous to have to be responsible and to kind of feel like it's all up to you. And so, depending on your relationship, depending on your partner, I mean, I have some clients who they take their temperature in the morning and their partner will like write down the temperature in their chart or
Hmm.
put it in the app or something like that. So I would say if your partner is super, super uncomfortable with it, the suggestion I usually give is that, because you work with a client, it's like, my partner's an engineer, and so he's really like skeptical, he's super science minded. So in that
Right.
case, it's like,
Right.
well, then have him read the information, consider taking a class. Because I've also had clients who, they'll take the class and it's like, I'm sending them all this material. I send goodies in the mail to everyone who signs up for the class. And we, have multiple sessions over a period, like extended periods of time. And, oh, you're meeting again? Like, so I think for a lot of people, especially like when you haven't heard of it, it's like, what is this thing that she's doing? But when you actually see what goes into it, what goes into learning, taking the time, understanding, taking it seriously, I think, and also understanding the science behind all that, I feel like, depending on your partner and your relationship, that could be helpful. In your case, though, you had no interest in reading the books about it.
No, because when you think about contraception, in my mind set, it was about something that you apply, right? So
Yeah.
I apply, I put on a condom. You either take a pill or get injected by something, or something is inserted to stop. So these things are they apply,
Yeah.
right? But then when you say that, I am just going to write in my book, and whatever I write in here is going to tell me that we're good. It was a little, it took some time to digest. 'Cause I was just like, how does that work? But then, as we know, like, the body is miraculous, man. It does some things that we, it's beyond our knowledge. And like, how does the body do this? How does it repair itself? How does it reproduce? And when you explain the science behind it and the research behind it, I was like, okay, all right. All right, I can't argue with the research. I'm not a researcher. I can't argue with it. I'm sure the people who did that know what they're doing. So yeah. So I followed the lead, and I'm not going to say I was not nervous the first time we actually tried it. Like, to be honest, after we did connect, and then, you're like, yeah, see, we're completely fine. I started thinking, what kind of foolishness. She thinks we're fine. Watch. So I sat my arms folded for a couple of weeks, like, just watch. She's gonna come to me. Oh, guess what? And then time went by, and I was like, nothing, really. And then you're like, see, I'm not pregnant. I'm like, it works. And I was like, okay. And then you think it's luck. The first time around, you think it's luck. For me, it's like, well, we're just lucky, whatever. And then try it again, and it worked. And then from that on, it was just the continuous. It worked. I was like, wow, this thing actually works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm on day 6 of my cycle. So just had another period. TMI. I mean, hey, it's always TMI on this podcast.
Yep.
And in our house as well. That's really interesting, though. See, this is funny. I always say this to my clients. I'm always like, it's so, when I have the opportunity to interview you, it's so nice because I get to ask questions that I wouldn't normally ask, and I get to hear new insights. And so this is kind of fun because we haven't actually had this conversation.
No.
We've been together for all these years. So, and I never thought to ask you how you felt the first time. So what's interesting about that, okay. So for many of my clients, for the first time that they learn the method, they listen to the podcast, they get the books, they start reading, they start charting, they start playing with this whole concept. And the clients who work with me directly, I mean, they chart their cycles. I always recommend waiting at least 1 full cycle when you're working with an instructor, or 3 cycles of full charting before you start having unprotected sex if you're working on your own, a minimum of 3 full cycles. But it's interesting because in this case with you and I had already successfully used this method in previous relationships. So I already knew that it worked, and I had no apprehension because I had already gone through that process myself.
Right.
I never thought about that. I never thought about what that would have been like for you till this moment. That's so funny.
See that? Yep.
I never thought about that. So then wow. And you didn't tell me that you were nervous.
No, I was super. Because I made the assumption that I knew everything about vaginas, right? Because I came from one, and then I married a person who had one. So then I had things under my belt, like I thought I knew. But then eventually, after this magic trick of the charting, I was like, I know nothing. Nothing at all.
Oh my gosh. That's really funny. That's a really good point, though. I'm glad that you shared that, because for most of my clients, it's not just their partner that's nervous as well. It's them.
Mm-hmm.
Because for the majority, I guess I can safely say the majority, because some of my clients do come to me after charting for many years. But I would say the majority of my clients don't have all the charting experience and don't have all the confidence, which is obviously why they're coming to work with me. And so if you think about it, I'm usually focused on the woman, my client, and her apprehension, because for her, this is the first time that she's used it. I talk about it a lot on the podcast, the terror and the fear when you first try fertility awareness for the first time. That makes perfect sense.
Absolutely.
And I had that experience as well, because I did have a first time of using the method. And of course, like, you're really cool. You understand the science, you're charting, you see the temperature rise, you see the mucus go away, you have your dry days. I charted for a couple of cycles before I started, and, I followed the instructions. But still the very first time is terrifying because you've never done it before, and you've read all the science, but you're still trying to deprogram from learning that you could get pregnant every day. But one thing that I haven't considered until you mentioned that was how the men feel.
Mm-hmm.
So you were basically, it was like Russian roulette. You're basically just like, well, she said it works, so let's see if it does.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
And then, what makes that unique in my case is that I had already experienced that. So it didn't even occur to me until this very moment. So, wow. So I feel like you blew my mind there. So I guess what comes out of that is that, and now I will be more sensitive to the plight of the male partner who also, and I can understand your apprehension, especially thinking about it, because you didn't read, like, I didn't, believe it or not, ladies, I didn't pull out the charting book.
Mm-mm.
And like, I mean, if he wanted to, we would have, like, I don't have a problem, but it's just our personalities and in our relationship and stuff like that. And so this literally was like you trusting me and trusting what I had told you. And so I can just imagine now the men who are totally, maybe they're not letting on, but feeling a bit nervous.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not until later on in our relationship, years after, when at night when you flick on the light and you turn and say, "Oh yeah, I'm just gonna write something down." I was like, "What is that?" And you're like, it's my charting book." I'm like, "Okay, all right, cool." And you go, "Oh, do you want to see?" And that's when you pull it and we go, "Look, here's my different colors. This is how I mark off." I'm looking at it, I'm like, "Really?" I'm like, "You write so small?" And you were like, "Yeah, here's this. I put this in," and you had a legend and you put all this stuff, and I was like, "Oh, okay. That's your book." And I was like, interesting. Because all this time when I saw you take out a book, write stuff, and kind of put it away, I thought you were documenting me. So I was like, maybe she's researching me. That's what it is. She's looking over, observing male specimen.
Oh,
And then she puts it away. But no, it was interesting. When I saw the book, I was like, wow, that's really, really cool. Yeah.
well, so ladies, yeah, if your partner is like totally hands off and doesn't really take an interest in like, because the other thing too is that I had already gone through my phase of fertility awareness being so central in my life. And when I first learned it, I had met you after I had been using this method for years. So it wasn't a new thing. I wasn't, newly learning anything. It's really interesting actually, because apparently I didn't really like fill your head with all kinds of stuff. Like I basically told him as much as he needed to know and wanted to know, followed his lead in terms of how much detail or how little detail he wanted. We kind of sorted it out and he basically trusted me and that was it. So for all of you who are kind of like, how could this work? If you're in that stage where this is something new for your relationship, I would say don't be discouraged if your partner doesn't really want to know. Of course, it's a blessing when your partner trusts you and is willing to take your lead. I mean, for a lot of women, it's a really big deal, especially for women who have had bad side effects or they have some concerns about their health. And so I find for the most part, men just want their women to be happy. Of course, who isn't thrilled about the possibility of having sex without a condom if that's, depending on the relationship. And also to have the opportunity to not be on contraceptive, especially if it has a detrimental effect on sex drive. Like there's a lot of potential benefits and positives. And so for the other thing I'll say about, if you're trying to convince a male partner that, or not convince, but if you're trying to have this conversation to switch into a non-hormonal method, I think focusing on some of those benefits, like the positive effects on the libido, if you are having some struggles or health challenges or questions or concerns. We've talked a lot about on the podcast how it takes a bit of time for cycles to normalize post-pill. And so if you have a future, orientation with when you're planning to try for a baby or something like that, I think there's a lot of really good reasons and points to consider switching, but a balance of that and focusing on how to really dive in, learn the method, understand it so it can be effective, having those conversations, like you said, and of course, having those conversations about how you're going to manage your fertility, how you can do that successfully, and
Right.
what you would do in case anything happened, which I would argue that you should have had that conversation.
Not the easiest, but yes.
Yes.
But my question to you though, so with me learning all this new vagina stuff over the years and still learning, have you been exposed to any research information, interviews, whatever it is, information that came your way that increased your ability to support your clients?
Well, I mean, certainly over the years, like it's interesting. I mean, if I think about it, so initially when I was in my early 20s, I took a class and I started teaching women. And since then, I took another class and a continuation essentially of the first class. And so that certainly deepened my understanding to another level. I would say the podcast has been an incredible opportunity for me to speak to tons of professionals, as you know.
Yes.
And that has been a really interesting way to just learn a lot more about a variety of different topics. Writing the book, you you were present.
Mhm.
Writing the fifth vital sign took 2 years. And there's, the research that went into that certainly is very eye-opening. And of course, my clients working through all of the different situations that I've seen over the years, I have a pretty significant, you could say, library of a variety of different situations that arise in the menstrual cycle just because of real life. And it's like
Mhm.
any practitioner who worth their salt, who's been in the field for a long time, the more client work you do, the more situations that you see, the more trends that you see, and
Yes.
the better you are able to support your clients because you've seen it before. So there's certainly some specific trends that
Right.
come up quite a bit. I know I talk a lot about the pill, and
Yes.
a pretty decent percentage of my clients are coming off the pill. So some are coming
Mhm.
off right away. They literally come off the month of the class, the month that the class starts. Others have come off of it within, 6 months, a year, 2 years, or something like that. Certainly, there's a small percentage of my clients who've never used the pill, but it's always like a really like, wow, how did you manage to never use the pill? I wanted to jump into today's episode to invite you to join us for the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery Live. We start in January. This is my 8-week group coaching program that's designed to help you unlock the secrets of your menstrual cycle. Fertility Awareness Mastery teaches you everything you need to know about using fertility awareness cycle tracking to achieve your intentions. Whether you're currently trying to get pregnant, avoiding pregnancy, or planning to conceive in the future, we've got you covered. This program goes deep. Get to the root of your period problems, hormone imbalances, fertility challenges, and so much more. Early bird registration is now open, but only for a limited time. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/BAM to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM. Now let's jump back into today's episode. But yeah, I would say that those things primarily, and continuing education opportunities as well.
Well, what's interesting, and not to delve too deep into the topic of the pill, because I'm not an expert, but since I've worked around a large amount of females, I would hear them talk about things. And because I have sat and listened to your interviews and listened to you while you're writing your book, things will pop in my head with things that you've said. So I'm hearing these conversations, and bing, I'm like, oh, that's what Lisa was talking about. And then I'd say, hey, can I ask you a question? They'll be like, yeah, what? You just said whatever. Were you ever on the pill, and have you ever felt like this and that? They're like, how do you know this stuff? I was like, well, I just know.
Oh, come on.
No, but then I was like, no, my wife, this is her thing. I go, you know what? Check this out. I would usually send you a text, and I'd say, Lisa, what was that episode on whatever? You'll tell me, and then I'd send it to them, and they'd go over the episode and be like, yes, that's it. It was really cool. It worked up like majority of the time.
Yeah, we've had a couple conversations like that where someone's talking about something. It's like, have you ever heard of PCOS? And they're like, what are you talking about? How do you know? And so
Yeah.
it's like journeys of the husband of the fertility or adventures.
Made me popular though.
But is it popular with things that you want to know about?
No. No. But everyone started coming to me saying, so I have this, and that. I'm like, oh, I didn't really want to hear that. But based off of, hold on a second. And I talk to you and then get the whichever episode, send it. They're like, yes. So it's really cool. I thought it was cool.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that question sometimes because I don't necessarily identify myself as the vagina girl, but in my
Whisper.
vagina whisperer,
Yes.
that's what he calls me, in case you were wondering. But in my personal life, because what's interesting too, I think this also speaks to, so the podcast and my client work is really where I focus on all things fertility awareness and menstrual cycle. And in my personal life, what's interesting is that when, like, for example, when I came out with the book, there were a group of our fairly close friends that had no idea that I was writing a book. And so to put it into perspective, like I talk about vaginas and the menstrual cycle and fertility awareness all day long in my work. And for any of you who are listening to this episode, you would probably imagine that in my personal life, I'm just going on about it all the time. And the opposite is actually true. I mean, I don't hide it. So if someone asks me what I do or if a topic comes up, sure, I'll talk about it. But ironically, with our closest friends, like it doesn't Like it only comes up if someone asks me a specific question because they know what I do.
Yes, no, that's true. Like even one of my closest friends, he has a copy of your book, and when I go over to his house, I'm going over to chill, listen to some music, just chill out. But then I look over and see the book there with notes in it.
Oh, really?
Yes, and I'm just like, and he picks it up and goes, "Oh yeah, on this chapter, it's saying," I'm like, "Why are you asking me questions about this? She wrote it." I was like, "I've been listening to this for like 3 years. No, put it down. Let's listen to music." So it's interesting because he has the book there. He's going through it, and he's interested. He's interested. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's interested because he hasn't had to hear it on like
No.
nonstop. So with the friends and things like that, it doesn't come up a lot. But with you,
Hmm.
because you're here and we're, so yeah,
Yeah.
you are the one. You are the one that hears about this stuff more than anyone
24/7.
else.
Yes.
Yes. Well, with that, I mean, as we draw to a close, I just want to thank you for coming on the show. I mean, we were just sitting there talking about this, and I was telling you that I wanted to do a solo episode for
Hmm.
2020 because I always take a moment to think about how to. So, for anyone who doesn't know, this when this episode comes out, this is basically the sixth anniversary of
Hmm.
the Fertility Friday podcast. So,
Yes. Congratulations.
thank you. So, the first episode of this podcast I released it's like the second last week of December in 2014. So now that it's 2020, it literally marks 6 years. So some years I just do something special, but I usually do a solo episode, and I've done, like a kind of like a lessons learned of the year or different topics. But when we were talking about it and I was telling you, you kind of said, well, why don't we just do an episode together? And I was like,
Yes. Why not?
oh, yeah, it's been a while. And I hadn't realized it had been 5 years, but
And why not? Because we're both home anyways now.
well, there's that. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And when I was thinking about doing the episode, I thought, okay, maybe I could do some of my takeaways from 2020.
Hmm.
So, yeah, this year has been really interesting. We had a lot of
Beyond.
changes in our family.
Yes.
I would say the biggest change is that we're all home now all the time.
All the time.
All the time. So before this, I mean, I work from home, obviously, but I would go out a lot. I went to the coffee shop, I went to the library, and that's basically my book was written in coffee shops.
Yes.
And I loved past tense, sad here, but I loved writing in coffee shops because I just like the buzz, the bustle, hustle bustle, and I put on my headphones and listen to music. But so, anyways, that was a big shift for me to always be at home. And then now we are homeschool parents.
Hmm.
Yay, us.
Yay. No.
So I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
that neither you nor I ever had the dream to be homeschooling parents, but now we are.
No, we are.
We are. So we decided to make that decision for a variety of reasons, but it's certainly been an adjustment. It's been actually wonderful having the boys home. So we have two sons, age 5 and 8. And I've actually really enjoyed having them home. But being that I work a lot, you have been the one that has been doing a lot of the homeschooling, the
Absolutely.
parenting, the taking care of the children, whatnot.
Yes. Yes. I am fully domesticated. Yes. It's awesome.
While also working, because you also work.
Yeah. It also work. So yeah, trying to find that healthy balance and escape when I can escape. We do some hiking though.
Yeah, we do.
We definitely do some hiking. We actually have hiking shoes.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. You bought me some hiking boots. It was great.
So that's been great to be able to connect to nature and to just connect on that level. There's something about that allows people just to connect on a different level, and and trying to be creative with our time.
Well, yeah, I feel like this year has been certainly a transition to the simple things. So I feel
Yeah,
like
very.
before all of these changes happened, there was a lot. I mean, we had the boys in all kinds of activities. We had all kinds of stuff going on. We were always busy. Every day was another thing. There was always something going on.
Mhm.
And I feel like and it's in a way, like I don't know if it's a positive change or a negative change, to be honest with you, but from the positive perspective, I think that it certainly has given me an appreciation of the simple things. And so to think about, going for hikes and being in nature, I love nature. I love going out and doing those
Mhm.
things. And so that's something. But as well, we have a lot of board games, and we've actually been
Yes.
doing a lot of like family time and playing games and things. Because when you're home all the time, you kind of have to think about creative ways
Right.
to deal, and we don't we you
And
know
you know me, I'm not a fan of board games.
I know, but you've been playing
And I've
them.
been playing.
But okay, so just as
Out
a
of my
random thing,
comfort
he
zone.
doesn't like playing board games, but then like we play checkers, and he's the best checker player, and I can't beat him. And then we play. I don't remember what the other games were, but it's like he doesn't like to play. And so, anyways, I learned that the reason he doesn't like to play is because he spent his entire childhood playing. So he's the master of all of the games, and I can't beat him in anything.
Something like that.
Side note. Side note.
Something.
So another lesson I learned, I feel like that's a really interesting, I would say, takeaway just that I experienced of like valuing the simple things this year,
Yes.
and also self-care.
101.
Yeah, I've been talking about it a lot on social media because I just feel like this has been a year that's been really stressful, lots of changes.
Yes.
Things are not back to normal, right? So it's still just a lot of things have shifted. I guess I don't deal with change well. I thought I did, but I don't think I do. And so it really highlighted the importance of self-care. And so meaning like making sure you're getting enough sleep, making sure that you are eating enough food, making sure like it's all the things I always talk about with my clients.
Very true. Because now taking care of yourself needs to be amended because it looks a little different.
Yeah.
Because before taking care of yourself, you had the freedoms to do certain things. And now that we're falling into a little bit of a limitation, that now you have to be a little bit more creative to kind of recreate what taking care of yourself looks like,
Yep.
right? Even if, for instance, we have the walking treadmill, right?
Yeah.
We
That was
wouldn't-
an addition.
That's an addition. We possibly wouldn't have purchased something like that because we would go out, do our things, whatever. But now that we're home and we need to have a space where we can exercise and do our thing, this is a great addition.
Well, yeah, one of the things that happened, so as I mentioned, I used to go to the coffee shop and whatever. And one of the things that happened was that because I was home all the time, I have a standing desk. So I'm often, standing, but there were a couple of really busy weeks where I was standing for like 11 hours, basically. And what I discovered is that standing puts a bit of pressure on your lower back. And so it wasn't really an issue before because I wasn't always at home working. And so I threw out my back. I had this horrible back spasm and I was on the floor. And anyways, so then one of the things, since I'm home all the time, I decided, let me try this treadmill thing. And so now I have a treadmill under my desk and I can actually walk and write and work and, do all the things I need to do. Everyone's journey is different. That's just a little kind of behind the scenes stuff here. But all this is to say that certainly with all of the changes that have happened, we had to get more creative about how to do our exercise, how to, do our self-care, because everything just looks different. And like you said, a lot of the things that we relied on before, we can't really do. But all in all, this year has been, I would say, pretty terrible in a lot of ways. But in other ways, we are together all the time. I feel like as a family, we've gotten closer. We've had an opportunity to kind of enjoy our time together in ways that we just didn't previously. So I would say that there are definitely some positives that came out of it.
Yeah, I would say so too. Traveling right across Canada.
Oh yeah, that's a thing. I don't think I've mentioned that. I don't know.
That's a journey.
Yeah, so we live in Ontario, Canada, and we actually drove across the country this summer. We took it. It takes 35 hours. For anyone who doesn't know, Canada is really big, and it took 35 hours. So it took us was it over 2 days? I think, or was it
2 days?
Yeah. So we went to visit family and friends, and that was one of the highlights of the year. I think I don't even remember if I mentioned it anywhere, but now, if you didn't hear it there, now you hear it here. So we had that was really nice.
That was great.
Yeah. So it's something the boys will always remember, and we will obviously also remember. We decided to drive across the country to visit my family, and it was really nice. Canada's really beautiful, It's a really beautiful place.
Yeah, it's hard to understand the size and the space that the capacity that we have.
Yeah, until you
you
take
actually
2 days to drive across the
2
country,
days.
and
Yeah.
two hotel. Hotel with an H. You said no motels. That was the rule.
No.
All right. Well, I feel like this has been a lot of fun, and I think this is probably a good place to stop. So we shared a little bit about the partner's experience with fertility awareness. which I hope is helpful. I learned a few things because I just hadn't thought about the male experience. It's so funny because for all the talking I do about fertility awareness, we hadn't talked about that. So I think that's really fun. And yeah, just kind of some thoughts on the year. So certainly a different style of podcast, but I hope that you all enjoyed it. This is how I suppose, celebrating my 6th year of podcasting. Honestly, when I first started the podcast, it's kind of funny. Like I told, obviously, John that I was like, okay, I'm going to start this podcast. And he went into the cupboard and he pulled out a mixer. So for anyone who doesn't know what a mixer is, that's actually what we're using to record the podcast. You plug in the microphones to it and it has power. So it powers the microphones and then you can use that to kind of plug into all, the recorders. So that's what's happening right now. But yes, the man pulled out a mixer out of the cupboard because he just had it laying around. So all this is to say that you've always been incredibly supportive and behind the scenes, you've always been there. You helped me to set up my new setup. I did a bit of an updated setup. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for always being so supportive of everything I've done. I don't know that I would have been able to do this without your support. It was kind of an undertaking, really.
You're welcome. Why not? You're welcome.
And thanks for being on the podcast. I'm sure that at least some of my long-term listeners will really appreciate getting a little kind of behind the scenes peek, and I'll put up a nice picture of us. Everyone can see what you look like, because I don't think that's ever happened.
No, not at all.
So this is my family. This is it. So before we end, anything else you want to share?
This is a fantastic journey, and I look forward to what's yet to come.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/344. I hope that you enjoyed today's interview with John with the Hubs. It was actually really fun recording it. I hadn't even thought to do it, so it was actually his idea, kind of like a throwback to when we did it 5 years ago for the first anniversary edition of the podcast. So if you haven't heard that episode, I'm sure it'll be interesting and funny to listen to, but episode 57 of the show. So this was an interesting opportunity to kind of give a little, backstage what it really looks like in our lives. And I think that it might come as a surprise that my husband doesn't necessarily know all the things and isn't necessarily like completely well versed and couldn't give a presentation on cervical fluid, but it makes sense. I mean, if you are a veterinarian and your husband has a different job, then it makes sense that he wouldn't be able to do veterinarian things, right? And so it's interesting, though, in our conversations to see how in some ways this just falls to the wayside because we negotiated it at the beginning. I talked to him about it and obviously answered as many questions as he had. And so he was satisfied and content to trust my ability to chart my cycles and to identify when. And he saw that it was working. I think that the most eye-opening aspect of the call for me was to hear him talk about how nervous he was the first time, because that's something that I hadn't really thought about. So I feel like that's something that I'll now always remember and keep in the back of my mind. I've spent so many years supporting women to overcome their feelings of nervousness and anxiousness when it comes to gaining confidence in fertility awareness. I mean, that's what I do in my programs. And that's often, what we're talking about on the podcast, depending on the episode that you're listening to. And so it was really eye-opening to hear his experience of basically the first time that we had unprotected sex on an infertile day. I didn't even think about it because I had already been using fertility awareness for years before I met him. It didn't even occur to me that it was a thing. But of course, for him, it was his first time. And if I think back to my very first time of using fertility awareness, I was satisfied with the science, but of course, it's always a bit nerve-wracking. And but certainly after years and years of timing sex based on your cycle and then having your period come right on schedule over and over and over again, at some point you stop being nervous because you start to understand that this science stuff really works. So that was really eye-opening, and I feel like that's also really helpful, especially if you are navigating these waters with your partner. If you're thinking about switching to fertility awareness and you've already started to have these conversations with your partner, I feel like it's a really, really helpful and important reminder that we need to think about where they're coming from and be sympathetic to their fears and their concerns. Yeah, I feel like it was really eye-opening, just that aspect of it. and a few other things that he talked about that I think were really important as well. So one of the reasons he was comfortable with it was because of where we were in terms of our relationship. If pregnancy happened, it wouldn't have been the end of the, that was kind of his frame of mind. For me, I certainly, because I knew already that it worked, I certainly didn't have a cavalier attitude about it. I certainly was not, until we were ready to start trying after we got married and after we were ready and made that decision. So I certainly wasn't thinking about, oh, if it doesn't work, it'll be okay. I was definitely being just on top of it like I always am, because I'm a planner, and anyone who's a planner as well is kind of nodding your head, because you know what I mean. So that's interesting to hear that difference, because for him, he was like, well, if it doesn't work, it's okay. But for me, I didn't think that way at all, because I already knew that it worked. But this is exactly the mindset, I think, and gives some window into like what your partner could be thinking and his genuine fears about it. And maybe those are some of the reasons why in cases where he's a bit more resistant to it, like that can give some insight as to why, because in his life experience, he hasn't had the experience of having unprotected sex with his a partner and not having the fear of that result in a pregnancy. So anyways, I feel like this was actually really eye-opening for myself, and I hope it's eye-opening for you as well, to really think about that conversation with your partner and what it's really like for them, and kind of also what it takes for them to become really comfortable and confident. And so having that knowledge and understanding is important. And then once your partner actually sees that it works and understands it in the experiential aspect of it, I think that's really helpful as well. And also that conversation about like what happens if something goes wrong, which I will always say should always happen. If you're having sex with another human, even if you use condoms, even if you are on the pill, the conversation should always happen. What would happen if I was on the pill and I was taking it, but I got pregnant, what would happen? So anyways, I will stop rambling on. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season. This episode is scheduled to come out on Christmas Day. So if you celebrate Christmas and you're listening to this episode on Christmas Day, Merry Christmas. And if you celebrate other holidays during this time, happy holidays to you. I hope that you are able to spend this time with your family or your loved ones or those close to you. And I hope that you're able to enjoy the season. So sending you my best wishes and love, and myself, like I think everyone on the planet, is certainly wishing you a happy new year as well. So in a week, it'll be a new year. If you're listening to this in real time, it'll be 2021. And here's to hoping 2021 will be an excellent year, certainly better than 2020. So I've said it, I've gone down on the record saying it, wishing for a much better 2021 than 2020. And so with that, I will let you go. Have a wonderful week, weekend, day, whenever you are tuning in. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.